crazy plant lady. The first question that must be asked is, how did this happen? How did she go crazy? In full disclosure, from the outside, the house at 79 Pleasant Street showed some signs of the wrongness taking root within its walls. The lawn growing unmowed, mail stacking up in the box and then overflowing, which prompted the wellness check. But mostly, the old brick, two-story house maintained a facade of normalcy. Of course, that has since changed, and there's been more than an abundance of speculation. My theory centers on a minor detail, something relayed by a neighbor who'd since moved out of state. After word spread about what happened in the house, one question about the woman's husband who died 10 years ago from the Big C. She mentioned a houseplant, an amaryllis, given in lieu of funeral flowers. It could have been the start, the trigger. It's easy to believe the story once you consider that one all-important detail. The husband dead. There were no children. The widow alone answers the door. There stands Mrs. Purdy from the house next door, a flower pot in hand. There's nothing obvious growing in the pot, just dirt. But upon closer examination, it's revealed there's an amaryllis bulb, desiccated though not dead, only waiting for the widow to water it, to ignite the spark of life. They drink coffee out of cafe cups, the ones used only for special company, and eat little pastries from the white box tied in red and white candy string that someone has dropped off. The widow can remember who. She cries. The neighbor listens to an outpouring of survivor's guilt. It's a neighbor's duty to be neighborly, after all. 2 hours later, the neighbor leaves and the widow resumes pacing. In her slippers, the sound of her footsteps in the newly empty house strikes like a dance in wooden clogs. She sobs, lost in a familiar landscape. Long moments after, she remembers the amaryllis. She runs the water and soaks the soil in the pot as instructed. She puts her head down but doesn't sleep. A decent night's sleep is part of a different life, one now ended. And the next morning, up before the sun, while going through the motions of fixing coffee she won't drink and suspicious sounds that used to be familiar, like the furnace running in the empty house, she catches sight of the amaryllis from the corner of her eye. She sees the barest fringe of green poking up from the top of the bulb, which sits like a shriveled heart in the dirt of the flower pot. Only that shrunken organ has come back to life. A fraction of an inch of new growth has sprouted forth, like proof of Lazarus exiting the crypt. Hallelujah. It's reasonable to speculate that the one plant in its seemingly miraculous growth triggered what followed. That with nothing other than death to occupy her thoughts, the widow grew obsessed over that sentimental glimpse of new life. That she sat beside it, spoke to it, played music to the plant while spiraling deeper into the lunacy that led to the ending point years later in the house on Pleasant Street. If so, here's what likely followed. The amaryllis puts on a burst of growth. Its spurt reveals the flower cone. The cone swells, helped along by the constant attention and direct sunlight. It flowers, 3 enormous red trumpets that shatter the gloom of the widow's isolated, lonely reality. And while the flowers endure, she's happy, even if the state is pure illusion. Then the flowers die. Happiness is fleeting. On the other side of the miracle, she's back in the fog of her grief, choking on her sorrow, when the instinct for self-preservation kicks in, and she makes the decision. What worked once should work again, she reasons. and so she buys a few new houseplants, 3 or 5 from the local grocery store. They brighten the house and the widow's mood. She tends to them, and her obsession grows. Coincidentally, around this time in the hypothetical storyline, she receives a check in the mail from the life insurance company, enough to cover her funeral costs and with plenty left over. And here's where things go terribly wrong. From there, it's constant trips to the upscale garden supply store and greenhouse. Yes, they remember the daily visits she made. The big ticket purchases, the palms and the other flora, like flowering hibiscus too big and heavy to be carried out, so they had to be delivered to Pleasant Street. According to witnesses, the house was still a house, not jungle at this point in the timeline. But there is no doubt how the jungle was created. An oasis contained within the walls of a sturdy brick house. An Eden, if you will, contained inside 1,500 square feet of living space. But Eden had its serpent. And so, too, did the deadly little jungle on Pleasant Street. About plants. A study was once conducted that proved plants of many different types could communicate with other flora through their network of roots. That, in a forest, oaks and pines, willows and beech could warn one another of a fire by generating pulses through their roots along a great distance about the looming danger. At first, the jungle on Pleasant Street wasn't capable of such a feat. Pots contained roots, shunted signals, and kept the hundreds of denizens self-contained, isolated from one another. In the beginning, that little Eden was no more conscious than a Japanese rock garden. But that thing about plants, nature can't be contained, not forever. Even harmless houseplants confined in decorative ceramic planters have their secrets. Some release spores, others seeds or little shoots of thin runners and stalks. So that spider plant, well loved, fed, and watered, putting forth a dozen spider plant babies, might lower one of its shoots onto the top of the credenza where its flower pot rests. And those dozen babies latch on and put forth roots hanging on. And the widow notices, charmed but also under their spell. She scoops a little mound of potting soil around each tender offspring and waters them, no longer caring about the credenza or the rest of the furniture. Only the plants. All for the plants. She buys them special grow lamps, another red flag that went mostly unnoticed in the spike of her electric bill. She waters, nurtures. The house gradually vanishes, becoming something else. The ivy at the top of the stairs claims and consumes the banister, all the way down to the newel post. The floors warp under the soil, standing water and root systems, which jab and chip and also lace together as pots and trays no longer contain them. Orchids flourish in the lengthening shadows. Green crowds the windows. The air grows humid. 10 years pass, and the jungle fills the house. Hangs from ceilings and hides fauna among its green thickets. The usual creatures invade, spiders and flies through gaps in the walls, mice through tiny foundation cracks. Some things entered when the window ran out of sterile potting soil and decided to shovel dirt from the yard into the house because it was free for the taking. The snakes followed the mice. The bats sneaked in through an attic vent. The thing that ripped off half a man's face after the wellness check when they entered the house on Pleasant Street. Well, at first it wasn't so easy to identify. The coterie included 2 EMTs, a police officer, and a woman from the town alerted to the situation after a soaring water bill suggested a busted pipe. The lawn had gone wild, and brambles had overgrown the walkway and were up to the windows. Mail had accumulated. Something was wrong. The policeman knocked on the door. No one answered. He pounded louder to the same results. He tried the door. It was locked, but the door had warped out of the frame and opened with little nudging. They walked in. The first words muttered were profanities. None understood what they were seeing, where they were standing. The air was thick with pollen and almost too dense to breathe. A yellow haze hung over everything. From somewhere unseen came the constant trickle of running water. "Hello," the policeman called. "My name is Officer Donovan." Something buzzed past his ear. Something else stung the woman from the town. As they pressed deeper, she screamed and swatted. Creatures disturbed by their progress flitted and flew, dark ghosts moving through shadows. The responders fanned out, going slowly among the elephantine fronds, obscenely colored blossoms, and jagged saw-toothed tentacles of gargantuan aloe vera plants. The floors had grown uneven beneath a dense carpet of succulents. Moss draped the drapes. The chirrup of insects played in one section of the jungle, and other factions answered from their corners. And then, right before it happened, all fell silent. One of the ambulance men moving through what had once been a front parlor turned back toward his partner. Both men shrugged. Before the inhuman shriek shattered the tenebrous calm, he stated that the air doubled in weight. The scream. The thing tore out of cover from behind one of the massive palm trees and was upon him, gouging, biting, flensing flesh from bone in a savage attack. The policeman tried to warn the attacker off. Thunder exploded when that failed, the report of his gun muffled within the house by branches and bricks. Blood poured from the injured man's gouges, which had dug out of the EMT's left eye. They rushed him out of the house and to the same ambulance he transported patients in. When their backup arrived, the police returned to the house, to the jungle, to the wild, dead thing hidden among the fronds. The bullet had destroyed part of its skull, tearing through scalp and a tangle of long hair. At first, the scabrous, virile corpse defied easy identification. It didn't look human, or anything like the widow, whose wedding photographs hung on the wall in frames coated in skeins of fungus. A lot of thank yous are owed tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to Gregory L. Norris for allowing me to read his story here. And thank you to Owl Publishing for sending it my way. None of this would be here without the culmination of all of it. I hope you all are staying warm. Take care, sleep well, and water your plants, and enjoy some R&R.